In this JavaScript programming lesson, you can learn to script dice rolls for web-based games that involve dice. Your dice can be standard 6-sided or have as many sides as your game requires. For instance, if you're programming dice throws for role-playing games, you could require dice up to as many sides as 100, maybe even. We're going to start with the bare bones of an HTML5 web document. First thing we'll do is apply our HTML and CSS. So in the body element, I want a div, and I'm going to want another div, and these divs are going to pretty much represent the dice. We're going to use CSS to float them so they're little boxes that sit side by side horizontally. Then we're going to want a button, and this will be put in place to give you something to click to actually roll the dice. And the value for what the user will see on the button is roll dice. Now that button has to have an onClick event equal to a JavaScript function that we're going to fire off. We'll name that roll dice. Open close parentheses. So every time this button is clicked, the dice will be rolled. Then we'll put an H2 element in place. We'll give that H2 element an ID of status. We'll instruct JavaScript to show things in this status element when you roll the dice. Now since these two divs are going to be floating, we're going to put some style in this H2 element of clear left, because those two divs above it are going to be floating left, and the button that's above it is also an inline element. So just to make sure the H2 element is living underneath all of those other elements, we're going to clear left, because these two divs are going to be set to floating. Now this first div, we're going to give an ID of die1, and we're going to give it a class that's equal to dice. And that's just how we're going to style these boxes up. The ID is what we'll use to communicate with this element in the JavaScript. So let's just go ahead and copy those two attributes and their values and place it in div2 and make sure we have die2 as the ID of that one. Class you can leave exactly the same. Now up in the head element, let's go ahead and open up a style element and make its type text CSS. Then make sure we go down a couple of lines and close that style element. And inside of it, we're going to add one rule that's for affecting these two divs with the class of dice. So any divs on the page with the class of dice are going to get these CSS properties applied. And I just set it up to make them a little gray box. Now inside of the divs, we're just going to add a 0 as a default value for each die. And then if we render this in our favorite browser, this is the output that you get. Now all we need is the roll dice function in JavaScript to actually make the dice roll. Let's go up into the head element right under our style element, and we're going to pop in a script element. Go down a couple of lines and be sure we close that script element. Now we need this function roll dice, so we can just really copy all of that right there and type in the word function and paste in roll dice with your parentheses, open curly brace, and go down a couple of lines and put in your closing curly brace. Now the first thing we want to do when the person rolls the dice, or when the roll dice function is called to run, and in our case we might have things in it that you might not have in your game, but we're going to have it in place for developer reasons so you can see all the output of what's going on. So first we're going to target die1 and die2 and get them into local variables. The object references for those elements are now in local variables called die1 and die2 because we used getElementById. And we also want to get this status, h2 status, as a local variable. Now we want to run two lines of code that are going to determine the value for die1 and the value for die2. And we're going to name those d1 and d2. And to get those, all you have to do is run some code that allows you to get a random number from 1 to 6. So that's the code I applied. It uses math.random times 6 plus 1, but that would be in decimal form. If you run math.random by itself, you'll see that it returns a decimal value. So we multiply that decimal value, and we use math.floor on math.random to make sure we don't have a decimal number. It's going to be a whole number. And since we're rounding down, that's why you see plus 1 here on the end. So basically this code will give you a random number that is from 1 to 6. If you need to be a random number from 1 to 20, you just put a 20 right there. So D1 and D2 are going to hold random numbers from 1 to 6. Now we want to create a variable that's going to be the dice total. So let's say var dice total is equal to D1 plus D2. So if the user rolls a 3 and a 4, it'll equal a 7 as their dice total. Now the next thing we're going to do is put the value for those individual die values into the actual dice, the graphical interface that you have for your dice on the page. That is, if you're even going to have a graphical representation of the dice roll. Your game might not even require that you have a graphical representation to show the user what the dice look like. You just might want to show them the total roll. So we target the element die 1 and die 2, and we affect their inner HTML property to make them say whatever value these come out to be. It'll be a random number from 1 to 6. Then the next thing we're going to do is update that h2 element that's our status, that tells us what we rolled. So we can say status.innerHTML is equal to you rolled, and then we insert the dice total, and we just concatenate that into the string using plus signs. So the dice total variable, remember we got right here by adding d1 plus d2. And that's a way you can show what the dice total is. Now I'll add a little bit of bonus logic for you here. It's an if condition that evaluates to see if d1, the value of d1 is equal to the value of d2. If it is, you're going to append to the status inner HTML a space and then the word doubles. You get a free turn. So this is how, this little if condition is how you can evaluate for doubles and then do things within your program. If your program does something special, if somebody gets doubles, this is where you do it, right here. Okay, now let's press Ctrl S and run this in our favorite browser. Let's roll dice. Alright, I got snake eyes, a first roll. What's up? I rolled a 2. Doubles, you get a free turn. So let's roll dice again. I rolled doubles again. This time I rolled an 11. There's a 10. A 4 and a 1, that equals 5. Okay, so you see how it works? These will always be numbers in between 1 and 6 randomly. And that's how you can simulate your dice rolls. And you just treat those values like dice in your software here. Okay, now let's quickly talk about if you need a random number in between 1 and 100. Like I said before, you put 100 right there. And then that way you'll have more like D&D dice or 20, like a 20-sided die. So I'm just going to leave this as 6, and you guys know in the back of your head that these can be dice of any value. So if you have like a 20-sided die like this little guy, or you can program it like casino dice, like the big white ones, or the big red ones. Alright, so I hope you found this JavaScript programming dice rolls for web games tutorial helpful, and maybe it'll get your wheels turning on things that you might be able to create that'll render in the browser.